When you picture a mummy, you likely imagine a Hollywood movie monster shuffling out of a cursed, darkened tomb. Modern cinema has taught us to fear these ancient figures wrapped in dusty bandages and surrounded by vengeful magic. But this terrifying illusion completely erases the magnificent and deeply scientific reality of the ancient Egyptian embalming process. The true story does not take place in the shadows of a haunted crypt hiding unspeakable evils. It unfolds under the bright desert sun, revealing a desperate and beautiful attempt to conquer death itself. You open your eyes to the blinding glare of the morning sun reflecting off the rushing waters of the Nile. The morning air is already growing incredibly heavy, with the punishing heat of a brutal Egyptian summer day. You are walking toward the Wabet, the sacred tent of purification where your daily work takes place. Forget the dark, cobweb-filled dungeons you have seen in countless horror movies. This place operates much more like a modern military field hospital pitched right on the riverbank. The structure is airy and open, allowing the steady river breeze to sweep away the heavy odors of death. You are Mena, a young and eager apprentice stepping into your very first year of formal medical training. The canvas walls flap rhythmically in the wind, creating a crisp sound that sharply cuts through the quiet morning. Inside, the wide space is meticulously organized, looking exactly like a well-funded trauma center preparing for a major casualty event. Long slabs of smooth limestone are lined up in perfect rows, scrubbed spotlessly clean and gleaming under the sunlight. Heavy jars of precious oils, sharp bronze blades, and towering sacks of raw natron salt are neatly arranged on wooden shelves. Everything here has a specific purpose, demanding absolute precision and leaving absolutely no room for amateur mistakes. Standing at the far end of the pavilion is your mentor, the master embalmer Khonsu. He carries the intimidating aura of a veteran chief surgeon at a top-tier metropolitan hospital. His posture is perfectly straight, his expression stern, and his eyes miss absolutely nothing that happens in his domain. He does not view his work as a gruesome task, but rather as a sacred medical duty to preserve human life. He washes his hands in a large copper basin, methodically scrubbing away worldly impurities before touching his patients. His movements are deeply practiced, projecting a quiet confidence that immediately calms your racing heart and unsteady nerves. As you tie your linen apron around your waist, the intense sensory details of the room wash over you. The sharp, clean scent of cedarwood oil battles against the harsh, alkaline bite of crushed salt in the air. You hear the metallic clink of bronze scalpels being sterilized and arranged on a wooden tray beside the operating table. Other junior apprentices are quietly rushing around the tent, carrying fresh linen bandages and fetching buckets of clean river water. The surrounding atmosphere is thick with the unspoken tension of a dedicated medical team bracing for a highly complex procedure. It is a symphony of coordinated professional action, entirely devoid of the superstitious dread you might have expected. Khonsu turns toward you, drying his calloused hands on a fresh towel with slow, deliberate motions. He looks you directly in the eyes, silently evaluating whether you have the mental fortitude for the exhausting hours ahead. He reminds you that you are not here to hack away at lifeless meat, but to perform a vital biological intervention. Every single cut you make today must be calculated, purposeful, and executed with the utmost respect for the anatomy. This is not magic or dark sorcery, but an advanced anatomical science that requires years of relentless, grueling study to master. You nod silently in agreement, slowly swallowing the dry lump of nervous anxiety forming in the back of your throat. The distant sound of a heavy wooden cart rolling over the stone pathway suddenly shatters the morning calm. The chief surgeon gives a brief, sharp nod to the assistant standing nearest to the wide entrance of the tent. They quickly pull back the heavy linen curtains, allowing a flood of bright sunlight to illuminate the central limestone table. You take your position opposite the slab, arranging your bronze hooks and obsidian blades in a neat row. But here is where the reality of this ancient profession gets truly interesting and incredibly challenging. The patient arriving today is not just anyone, and the biological clock is already ticking dangerously fast. The attendants carefully transfer the heavy, linen-wrapped figure onto the cold surface of the operating table with practiced ease. Khonsu steps up to the head of the slab, his face devoid of emotion as he inspects the new patient. You can feel the intense weight of responsibility settling onto your shoulders as you stand under the unforgiving desert sun. The air suddenly feels incredibly still, as if the entire riverbank is holding its breath in anticipation of the first incision. The chief surgeon raises his hand, signaling that the delicate work of preserving a human legacy has officially begun. The heavy linen wrapping is slowly peeled back to reveal a surprisingly young government official. He was a rising star in the administration who met a suddenly tragic and unexpected end. In the modern corporate world, missing a critical deadline might only cost you a lucrative promotion. However, on this unforgiving stone slab, failing to meet the strict timeline will cost his eternity. The devastating Egyptian heat is already seeping through the tent and threatening the delicate biological tissues. You realize immediately that this is not a leisurely ritual, but a desperate race against nature. The ambient temperature inside the canvas structure is rising rapidly as the busy morning slowly progresses. Khonsu examines the pale skin with the calculating eye of an incredibly seasoned project crisis manager. He knows perfectly well that cellular decomposition is a relentlessly aggressive enemy that never takes breaks. Every passing minute allows destructive bacteria to multiply exponentially within the increasingly warm and defenseless host. They are currently facing a brutal biological deadline that simply cannot be extended under any circumstances. The margin for error is absolutely zero if they want to guarantee a highly successful preservation. Now listen carefully, because this is where the operation truly becomes a high-stakes professional gamble. The chief surgeon begins barking out a series of rapid commands to his attentive medical team. You must quickly shake off your lingering nervous anxiety and spring into highly coordinated, purposeful action. There is absolutely no time left to ponder the philosophical meaning of human life and death. Your sole focus must be entirely on executing precise mechanical tasks to halt the rapid decay. You grab a stack of clean linen towels to quickly absorb the pooling moisture collecting nearby. The wealthy family of this young official has paid a premium price for top-tier funerary services. They expect flawless execution and a perfectly stabilized vessel for his treacherous journey into the afterlife. The heavy pressure resting on your inexperienced shoulders feels incredibly similar to a massive corporate emergency. Can your young and completely untested hands keep up with the grueling pace of this operation? Khonsu does not offer any comforting words of encouragement to soothe your rapidly racing heartbeat today. He only points a long, commanding finger at the specific set of sterilized bronze surgical tools. The air inside the purification tent grows incredibly thick with the unspoken tension of impending action. Everyone standing around the limestone table acutely understands the severe financial and spiritual consequences of failure. You quickly wipe a stray bead of salty sweat from your deeply furrowed and anxious brow. The biological clock is ticking so loudly in your mind that it almost becomes physically deafening. Khonsu finally picks up his sharpest obsidian blade and positions his steady hands over the body. The most intense and challenging shift of your entire young professional career has now officially begun. You take a deep breath and desperately try to force your trembling fingers to remain perfectly still. The demanding chief surgeon shoots you a brief but incredibly piercing look of strict professional expectation. This demanding environment offers absolutely zero sympathy for a terrified apprentice struggling to find their footing. You must completely suppress your natural human fears and embrace the cold logic of anatomical science. The uncompromising battle to save this young man from eternal oblivion is now demanding your absolute best. The first critical step of this operation focuses entirely on the patient's head. The human brain is an incredibly moisture-rich organ that decomposes extremely fast. If left inside, it will quickly destroy the surrounding facial tissues forever. Khonsu steps forward and firmly anchors the heavy head with his hands. You watch closely as he prepares to perform the most difficult technique. Popular culture often paints this specific procedure as a violently brutal act. You might imagine an ancient butcher aggressively hacking away at the skull. People naturally assume the ancient Egyptians simply crushed the bone with force. However, the reality unfolding before your eyes is remarkably sophisticated and gentle. But the real secret of this process is about to be revealed. You are not witnessing a gruesome mutilation of a dead human body. You are actually observing a highly advanced form of ancient neurological surgery. The master surgeon must operate blindly inside a completely enclosed cranial space. Khonsu reaches for a specialized instrument resting on the sterilized wooden tray. It is a long, incredibly slender bronze hook with a curved tip. The polished metal gleams sharply under the bright Egyptian morning sunlight. He leans over the pale face with absolute focus and intense concentration. He carefully guides the cold bronze instrument directly into the left nostril. You unconsciously hold your own breath in the heavy, silent canvas tent. Suddenly, a distinct, sharp crunching sound echoes softly across the stone table. The delicate ethmoid bone located behind the nose has been perfectly pierced. The metallic hook now slides deep into the fragile, dark cranial cavity. You can clearly hear the bronze scraping gently against the inner skull. It is a deeply unsettling yet morbidly fascinating acoustic experience for you. Despite the immense pressure, the veteran surgeon's calloused hands never shake once. The heat inside the tent continues to press down on your shoulders. You wipe another drop of sweat away while watching the hook move. Every subtle twist of the bronze wire requires incredibly precise physical feedback. Khonsu relies entirely on the delicate vibrations traveling up the metal shaft. He begins to rhythmically twist the instrument to break down the tissue. The soft brain matter is methodically whisked into a thick biological liquid. This intricate step requires an absolutely flawless understanding of internal human anatomy. One slight miscalculation would instantly shatter the delicate bones of the face. The liquefied organic material must now be carefully drained from the skull. Khonsu gently tilts the heavy head sideways toward a waiting copper basin. Simple gravity performs the rest of this highly complex and difficult extraction. It is an incredibly efficient and brilliantly practical solution to a massive problem. Why do they go through this highly complicated and tedious surgical procedure? Why not simply cut the back of the head wide open instead? The profound answer is deeply rooted in their most sacred spiritual beliefs. The physical identity of the deceased must remain completely flawless for eternity. The wandering spirit must be able to recognize its own preserved face. If the visible structure is damaged, the young official is lost forever. Khonsu is actively fighting to protect this specific man's unique personal identity. This is precisely why such a delicate and minimally invasive approach exists. The chief surgeon finally withdraws the bronze tool from the nasal passage. He immediately flushes the completely empty cranial cavity with strong palm wine. The harsh alcohol successfully sterilizes the dark space against any remaining bacteria. Hot melted coniferous resin is then carefully poured inside to seal it. This specific mixture of alcohol and botanical spices serves a dual purpose. It stops bacterial growth while masking the heavy metallic scent of blood. The fragrant oils immediately transform the atmosphere of the busy surgical tent. You breathe a tiny sigh of relief as the sharp odors fade. The thick liquid resin rapidly cools and hardens into a protective cast. The fragile inner skull is now structurally reinforced from the inside out. You marvel at how the young man's face remains perfectly undisturbed throughout. Gunzu steps back slightly to quietly inspect his highly precise surgical handiwork. The absolute brilliance of this ancient medical technique suddenly washes over you. These early practitioners essentially invented minimally invasive surgery thousands of years ago. There are absolutely no massive, disfiguring surgical scars left on the visible skin. The master embalmer has successfully conquered the most critical biological deadline today. You carefully wipe down the polished bronze instruments with a clean cloth. The most technically demanding portion of the morning operation is finally complete. The young official has successfully passed his very first test of preservation. However, the long and grueling journey toward eternal life has just begun. You stare down at the empty cranial cavity while your hands begin to shake uncontrollably. A wave of intense nausea suddenly washes over your exhausted and terrified mind. The brutal reality of cutting into human flesh is finally taking a heavy psychological toll on you. You clumsily fumble with a heavy copper bowl and almost drop it. This demanding medical environment leaves absolutely zero room for a trembling and hesitant medical resident today. Gonzu notices your sudden panic and immediately halts the relentless pace of the morning operation. He steps away from the cold limestone table and places a firm hand on your trembling shoulder. The intimidating chief surgeon softens his gaze to offer some paternal comfort. He knows that every single apprentice eventually faces this overwhelming moment of deep, existential dread. You look up at him while desperately trying to hide your rapidly falling nervous tears. He speaks with a quiet authority that grounds your violently racing heartbeat. You mistakenly believe that these sharp blades are committing a terrible act of violent desecration. He explains that you are actually performing a noble mission of ultimate physical salvation. If you do not intervene quickly, the harsh desert elements will completely devour this unfortunate patient. Your precise surgical cuts are actively rescuing this young man from an eternity of nothingness. How can inflicting such immense physical damage truly be considered a beautiful act of healing? Gonzu answers this silent internal question before you can even whisper it aloud. He reminds you that eternal survival requires sacrificing the delicate organs that bring about rapid decay. The fragile flesh must surrender its darkest elements to preserve the enduring beauty of identity. You slowly absorb these profound words while staring at the cold skin of the official. This profound shift in perspective fundamentally changes how you view your demanding and gruesome duties. You are not a butcher tearing apart a human corpse, but a dedicated guardian of life. The massive weight of your medical responsibility suddenly feels like an incredibly honorable personal calling. You take a slow, deep breath and finally steady your visibly shaking and inexperienced hands. The seasoned mentor nods in quiet approval as you confidently pick up the sharp obsidian scalpel. The young body has been successfully emptied of its most volatile and rapidly decaying organs. You feel a renewed sense of profound professional purpose as you look at the resting patient. The remaining tissues must now be completely drained of every single drop of biological moisture. But how can a fragile human body possibly survive weeks of intense and aggressive chemical dehydration? The brilliant historical solution to this massive biological problem will completely shatter your modern scientific expectations. With the internal organs safely removed, a massive biological challenge immediately presents itself to the medical team. The remaining human tissue still contains a tremendous amount of natural water that will trigger rapid decomposition. If you simply leave this prepared body in the hot desert sand, it will rot within days. The ancient priests needed a highly effective method to completely eradicate every drop of biological moisture. How did they achieve this seemingly impossible scientific feat without modern temperature-controlled dehydration chambers or vacuum sealers? The answer lies in a seemingly ordinary mineral harvested directly from the dry lake beds of Egypt. It is a naturally occurring chemical compound that the ancient embalmers referred to as divine natron salt. You might initially assume this pale powder possesses some kind of mystical religious magic from the gods. Here is exactly where the ancient scientific reality gets incredibly interesting for a modern medical observer today. This sacred substance is actually a highly potent chemical mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate. In modern American terms, they were essentially using a massive industrial quantity of concentrated baking soda. Konsu gestures toward the massive woven sacks stacked heavily against the canvas walls of the purification tent. You and the other apprentices begin hauling these heavy bags toward the resting body of the official. The team systematically buries the entire human form under a massive, suffocating mountain of this pale powder. Every single inch of exposed skin must be completely covered to ensure a perfectly uniform chemical reaction. This is not merely a symbolic burial ritual designed to appease the watching gods of the underworld. It is a highly controlled laboratory procedure engineered to forcefully extract water through aggressive cellular osmosis mechanics. Once the patient is fully submerged in the salt, the grueling waiting period of 40 days begins. During this long duration, the natron acts as a relentless and highly efficient chemical sponge, absorbing moisture. It aggressively pulls the dangerous fluids out of the biological tissues while simultaneously destroying any harmful bacteria. The harsh, alkaline environment completely neutralizes the natural enzymes that would normally cause the fragile flesh to degrade. You are essentially watching a slow-motion chemical transformation that rivals any modern industrial preservation technique used today. The Webet tent has temporarily transformed from a surgical operating room into a highly advanced chemistry laboratory. As the long weeks pass, you routinely check on the submerged body under Konsu's watchful expert eye. The massive pile of natron slowly becomes heavy and clumped as it absorbs the escaping bodily fluids. You must carefully remove the saturated layers of salt and quickly replace them with fresh, dry powder. This constant maintenance requires immense physical labor and an unwavering attention to the specific chemical drying process. The oppressive desert heat actually works in your favor by accelerating the rapid evaporation of the moisture. Every single day brings the young official one step closer to achieving a state of permanent physical stability. When the 40th day finally arrives, the entire medical team gathers around the stone table in silence. You begin carefully brushing away the hardened crust of the remaining natron salt from the pale skin. The dramatic, physical transformation of the young government official is absolutely astonishing for the entire medical team. The previously soft and vulnerable flesh has been completely converted into a tough, leathery, and incredibly resilient material. All of the dangerous moisture has been successfully eradicated without destroying the fundamental human, structural physical integrity. The ancient chemical desiccant has performed its vital biological job with absolute scientific perfection and flawless precision. It is deeply humbling to realize the sheer brilliance of these ancient scientific pioneers working without microscopes. They discovered a perfectly balanced chemical compound that aggressively dehydrates human tissue while leaving it perfectly intact. Modern mortuary sciences still struggle to replicate this exact level of organic preservation using synthetic chemicals. The ancient Egyptians did not rely on dark magic or spooky curses to secure their eternal afterlife. They relied entirely on a masterful understanding of natural chemistry and advanced environmental manipulation to cheat death. You have successfully completed the most scientifically demanding phase of this incredible ancient medical journey today. Think about the sophisticated research laboratories operating across America in our modern technological era today. Teams of highly educated scientists spend decades trying to perfectly stabilize fragile organic compounds for storage. Yet Konsu and his dedicated medical staff achieved this exact biological victory thousands of years ago. They utilized the natural resources of the surrounding desert to engineer a flawless chemical preservation system. Your tired hands are now covered in the alkaline dust that successfully conquered the natural decay. The young official is safe from the ravages of time, ready for the next sacred step. While the young government official rests safely in his expensive salt bed, another quiet arrival demands your immediate attention. This new patient arrives completely alone, without any grieving crowds or highly decorated wooden transport carts today. He is merely an exhausted common laborer whose weary body finally surrendered to the harsh Egyptian desert sun. His grieving family could only scrape together enough small copper coins for the absolute most basic preservation package available. There will definitely be no imported cedarwood oil or highly expensive frankincense wasted on this particular stone slab. You quickly prepare a much harsher mixture of simple cedar pitch and heavily diluted palm wine instead. The surgical tools specifically assigned for this routine procedure are noticeably older and slightly duller than your primary set. You naturally assume that this lower-tier service means you can finally rush through the exhausting physical labor. Here is where it gets interesting regarding the strict professional standards of the ancient Egyptian medical team. You carelessly toss a handful of cheap salt onto the laborer's chest with a heavy, tired sigh. Khonsu immediately grabs your wrist with astonishing speed and firmly stops your completely disrespectful hand movement. The veteran surgeon stares deeply into your eyes with a fiercely disappointed and terrifyingly stern expression. He sharply reminds you that a poor man's eternity is just as valuable as a wealthy nobleman's. Modern society often fiercely defends the fundamental democratic idea that all people are created perfectly equal. We firmly believe that every single individual possesses an inherent dignity regardless of their financial bank account. You surprisingly find this deeply egalitarian philosophy thriving right here inside this ancient desert medical tent. The wealthy elite can certainly purchase sweeter perfumes and much softer linen bandages for their eternal journey. However, they cannot purchase a greater right to exist in the beautiful afterlife than this unknown commoner. You deeply absorb this profound moral lesson and completely adjust your previously arrogant and careless physical posture. You carefully wash the calloused hands of the unknown laborer with the exact same delicate professional touch. Every single surgical incision is performed with absolute precision to protect his unique physical identity for eternity. The cheaper chemical natron is meticulously packed around his tired muscles with incredibly intense focus and care. The pungent smell of the cheaper resin sharply fills your lungs as you seal the small incisions. This sticky substance lacks the incredibly soothing floral aroma of the expensive materials used earlier this morning. Yet the protective function of this basic chemical barrier remains absolutely identical to the premium royal treatment. You methodically coat every inch of his weather-beaten skin to prevent any destructive moisture from re-entering. Khonsu quietly watches from across the busy tent as you meticulously arrange the heavy bags of salt. He gives a small nod of genuine approval that fills your exhausted chest with immense professional pride. You finally understand that your medical skills are not merely a luxury service for the extremely rich. They are a fundamental human right granted to anyone seeking safe passage across the dark spiritual waters. This humble stone table absolutely strips away all the superficial illusions of temporary earthly wealth and power. Death functions as the ultimate equalizer that reduces both kings and commoners to fragile biological components. Your incredibly vital medical duty is to ensure that every single patient has a fighting chance tomorrow. The grand scale of the eternal universe does not care about the size of a man's wallet. 40 long days have finally passed since the young official was first submerged in the natron salt. You stand before the limestone table again to witness the profound physical transformation of this patient. The harsh and clinical atmosphere of the surgical tent is about to dramatically shift into something beautiful. The heavy, suffocating scent of chemical drying agents and raw biology begins to slowly fade away today. You prepare to transition from the grueling work of a field surgeon to a compassionate spiritual guardian. Gonzu instructs you to bring forth heavy ceramic jugs filled with incredibly potent and fragrant palm wine. You pour the clear liquid over the dehydrated skin to wash away the remaining alkaline dust. The strong alcohol acts as a powerful purifying agent that completely neutralizes any lingering odors of decay. The previously foul and unsettling smells of the human anatomical breakdown vanish entirely from the open air. This precise washing process feels incredibly therapeutic after enduring the intense visual brutality of the previous weeks. But what happens next will completely change your perspective on this ancient and deeply misunderstood medical practice. The clinical coldness of the operating room is instantly replaced by an overwhelmingly warm sensory experience. You open a series of small alabaster jars containing the most expensive and highly prized botanical extracts. The incredibly rich aroma of melted pine resin immediately fills the wide spaces of the wabet tent. Sweet myrrh and spicy cinnamon aggressively blend together to create an intoxicating and beautifully sacred atmospheric perfume. Your previously harsh and incredibly calculated surgical movements now become entirely soft and deeply respectful caresses. You gently massage the fragrant cedarwood oils deep into the stiff and thoroughly dehydrated human tissues. This luxurious oil helps restore a small measure of natural flexibility to the hardened and leathery skin. The intense physical violence required during the initial biological extraction phase has completely vanished from this room. You are no longer fighting a desperate battle against the aggressive forces of natural physical decomposition. Instead, you are lovingly preparing a fellow human being for their absolute most important glorious journey. The golden oils gleam brightly on the preserved skin under the warm afternoon Egyptian desert sunlight. Every single deliberate touch is meant to soothe the immense trauma that the physical body just endured. Gonzu watches your gentle hands with a quiet expression of deep professional satisfaction and profound spiritual approval. The terrifying monster of Hollywood fiction has been completely replaced by a beautifully crafted vessel of eternity. The overwhelming fragrance of the sacred spices acts as a powerful mental purification for your exhausted mind. You breathe in the sweet cinnamon and feel the heavy, lingering anxiety finally release from your chest. The deep underlying fear of mortality that originally haunted your early training days is completely washed away. This specific phase of the embalming process is undeniably designed to comfort the living just as much. You are carefully wrapping this tragic human loss in an incredibly beautiful and deeply fragrant sensory blanket. The young government official no longer looks like a tragic victim of a sudden brutal illness. He now resembles a deeply serene statue carved directly from the finest darkened Egyptian desert wood. The meticulous application of these rich botanical resins has completely elevated his physical form into something divine. You gently wipe away a small excess drop of myrrh from his perfectly preserved and peaceful cheek. The absolute hardest part of the grueling biological preservation process has now been successfully and flawlessly completed. The surrounding air inside the canvas tent feels incredibly light and profoundly peaceful as the afternoon progresses. You stand back to admire the beautifully restored dignity of the patient resting upon the stone slab. The heavy burden of the ticking biological clock has been entirely lifted from your tired young shoulders. The master surgeon quietly signals that it is finally time to prepare for the crucial wrapping phase. You begin to gather the massive piles of freshly woven linen waiting quietly in the warm shadows. This magnificent sensory transition effectively prepares both the patient and the healer for the coming spiritual tests. The beautiful perfumes have successfully driven away the dark and ugly realities of normal human biological death. You closely look at the hollow chest cavity, where the internal organs were previously extracted earlier today. A highly specific and incredibly important void remains waiting for its final and most crucial protective step. The ultimate secret regarding which specific organ was deliberately left behind is about to be completely revealed. You look closely at the hollowed chest of the beautifully preserved young government official. Most of the internal organs were previously removed and placed into perfectly sealed jars. However, one profoundly important biological component remains firmly anchored deep inside his chest. The master embalmer specifically instructed you to never touch this particular vital human organ. Why did they completely destroy the complex brain, but fiercely protect this humble muscle? Modern American medicine teaches us that human consciousness resides entirely within the neurological brain. We currently view the human heart as merely a mechanical biological blood-pumping machine. The ancient Egyptian medical practitioners possessed a radically different and deeply philosophical, cultural perspective. They firmly believed the brain was just useless biological stuffing meant to be discarded. The heart was actually considered the absolute core center of all human intellectual existence. Think of the preserved human heart as an incredibly sophisticated ancient digital hard drive. It essentially stores every single memory, intense emotion, and moral decision from your lifetime. Every act of random kindness and every terrible sin is permanently recorded right there. When the young official finally awakens in the afterlife, he will absolutely need this. Without this critical internal storage device, his unique personal identity would completely vanish forever. This incredibly precious organ must eventually face the ultimate spiritual judgment in the underworld. The divine gods of the afterlife will place this exact heart on a golden scale. It will be directly weighed against the sacred feather of absolute truth and universal justice. If the heart is heavily burdened with wicked deeds, a terrifying monster will consume it. That catastrophic spiritual failure would mean the absolute and permanent death of his eternal soul. The sheer psychological weight of this profound spiritual responsibility is truly staggering to completely comprehend. You are literally holding the entirety of a man's lived human experience in your hands. If you accidentally damage this fragile muscle, you have permanently destroyed his promised eternal future. The ancient Egyptians did not fear physical death, but they absolutely dreaded being completely forgotten. This beating drum of human life was their only true anchor to achieving personal immortality. This heavy philosophical reality completely changes how you approach the empty chest cavity today. You are essentially safeguarding the complete moral ledger of a fellow mortal human being. You gently pack clean linen soaked in sweet resin around the delicate cardiac tissue. It must remain perfectly secured in its original anatomical position for the final spiritual journey. Gondu carefully inspects your precise physical placement to ensure the spiritual hard drive is safe. The entire body is now perfectly purified and chemically stabilized against any future natural decay. All the necessary organs are either safely removed or fiercely protected inside the open chest. But here is where it gets incredibly interesting for the exhausted and dedicated medical team. How do you permanently seal this biological vessel to safely survive for 3,000 years? The profound answer involves a mesmerizing physical rhythm that will slowly put your mind to sleep. The late afternoon sun has finally begun its slow and brilliant descent toward the distant western horizon. The harsh heat of the unforgiving desert day is gradually giving way to a much softer, more forgiving golden light that deeply bathes the quiet purification tent. You stand at the foot of the limestone table with a massive basket woven from strong river reeds resting heavily against your tired hip. Inside this simple basket lie hundreds of yards of the finest linen cloth, which was freshly washed in the cool waters of the Nile and dried perfectly crisp under the bright sky. The grueling biological struggle against aggressive decay has finally ended, and now the beautiful hypnotic rhythm of eternal preservation can gently begin. You reach into the deep basket and slowly pull out the very first long strip of pale, fragrant linen, feeling the wonderfully rough texture against your calloused fingertips. Gonzo stands silently at the opposite end of the quiet table, offering a small, reassuring nod that completely releases the last remnants of your nervous tension. The canvas walls of the wabet flutter softly in the cooling evening breeze, creating a steady, rhythmic sigh that perfectly matches the newly peaceful atmosphere of the room. Time itself seems to slow down significantly as you carefully begin the incredibly intricate process of individually wrapping each separate finger of the young official's right hand. The repetitive physical motion is surprisingly soothing, demanding your absolute focus while simultaneously allowing your exhausted mind to drift into a state of profound, meditative calmness. You gently lift the small, hardened finger, carefully sliding the crisp linen strip underneath, and then smoothly pull it tight to create a perfectly seamless and protective layer. The quiet, dry, rustling sound of the fabric rubbing softly against itself echoes gently throughout the spacious tent, creating an incredibly relaxing auditory rhythm that washes over your tired senses. Swish, wrap, pull, swish, wrap, pull. The simple, repetitive sounds blend seamlessly together, effectively blocking out any distracting noises from the busy riverbank outside. You meticulously repeat this exact same delicate motion for every single finger and toe, ensuring that absolutely no piece of dehydrated skin remains exposed to the open air. Your previously shaking and terrified hands are now moving with a graceful, practiced fluidity that completely surprises you, guided by a deep and newfound respect for this sacred duty. The heavy burden of the ticking biological deadline has completely vanished, replaced by an expansive, unhurried timeline that stretches gracefully into the vast eternity of the afterlife. You are literally weaving a protective cocoon of pure white cloth that will safeguard this man's physical identity against the relentless, destructive forces of passing millennia. After the individual digits are perfectly secured, you begin the much longer process of slowly spiraling the wider linen bandages up the long length of the official's arms and legs. The rhythmic wrapping creates a mesmerizing visual pattern, transforming the dark, hardened skin into a beautifully structured, pale form that looks like a magnificent religious sculpture. The sweet, lingering aroma of the melted pine resin and spicy cinnamon continues to heavily perfume the air, enhancing the deeply hypnotic and profoundly peaceful trance-like state of your work. You are completely lost in the gentle, repetitive flow of the ancient ritual, completely forgetting the brutal heat of the morning and the terrifying pressure of your very first surgical cuts. Every precise layer of tightly wound linen adds another profound layer of absolute permanence to the silent figure resting peacefully upon the cold stone table. The rhythmic, swishing sound of the fabric becomes a steady, comforting lullaby that effectively silences all of the lingering anxieties surrounding human mortality and the frightening unknown of death. You have successfully helped transform a fragile, decaying human body into an incredibly resilient vessel that is finally prepared to brave the vast and terrifying darkness of the underworld. But before the final, heavier layers of protective cloth can be firmly secured in place, a crucial layer of spiritual insurance must be carefully inserted. As you prepare to apply the final, thickest layers of protective linen, Khonsu approaches the table holding a small wooden box. He opens it carefully to reveal dozens of beautifully crafted magical amulets carved from precious stones, gold, and vibrant blue faience. You must meticulously weave these powerful magical charms directly into the specific layers of the cloth covering the young official's body. These are not merely decorative pieces of expensive ancient jewelry meant to display earthly wealth in the dark, silent tomb. They serve a highly specific and desperately important functional purpose for the incredibly dangerous spiritual journey that lies immediately ahead. You realize this is basically a highly organized checklist. Khonsu does not randomly scatter these magical charms. Once every single amulet is secure, the young government official is completely armed, heavily armored, and magically in the deeply satisfying rhythm of the protective wrapping. You step back from the relentless Egyptian sun. It paints the evening sky. This dramatic sunset cast your grueling physical labor. They are dressed in the leading priest. This imposing figure represents Anubis. You respectfully bow the crucial transition from physical but the attending priests. He currently stands tall and the heavy scent of a chorus of deep rhythm. The high priest confidently steps. This specific ritual instrument is designed. This powerful symbolic gesture. It ensures that this carefully preserved biological. You watch the mesmerizing ceremony on the incredibly heavy. You look closely at the completely He looks absolutely perfect. Fully armed, Khonsu moves. The intimidating chief surgeon places. You both stare quietly. There is the flawless physical condition of the departing. You suddenly realize you are not merely an ancient mortician. You are a highly skilled biological architect. Your precise surgical cuts actively defied because of your incredibly steady hand. The priests carefully secure. They slowly carry the rhythmic sounds of their. You stand quietly by the incredibly demanding surgical operation that this monumental achievement completely redefines. You have successfully defeated the terrifying Hollywood monsters. The grand curtains separate. You bravely stared directly into the epic climax of this incredible preservation. The heavy golden sarcophagus. Find the magnificent chanting of the. You are left standing entirely alone with the immense spiritual. You slowly untie the heavy. Your young muscles fiercely. The demanding master surgeon quietly begins. There is absolutely no dramatic celebration or loud cheering, for you both walk. The cool water feels remarkably. You methodically scrub away this simple physical washing act powerfully symbolizes it feels exactly like quietly clocking out, but the most profound emotion. The intense stress of battling aggressor. You have done absolutely everything. Khonsu give the loud, bustling noise of the busy ancient city. You slowly walk along the dusty dirt, the terrifying clinical pressures of the tense surgical tent. You are absolutely ready to. Modern movies have completely misunderstood the fundamental. Hollywood blockbusters love to portray the ancient Egyptians. They are constantly depicted as grim, unhappy people. You might easily believe they simply worship the terrifying. But the real secret we discovered tonight, the breathtaking historical truth, is that they were actually they absolutely adored. They deeply cherished they celebrated massive, vibrant festivals filled with their desperate medical quest for eternal physical presence. It was a fiercely beautiful, deep. We currently live in a frantic modern society. We frequently exhaust ourselves completely while chasing endless corporate. We stay up incredibly late, answering completely trivial work emails. We constantly carry the crushing weight of these. Have you ever felt completely suffocated when you view your personal struggles through those seemingly massive daily corporate emergencies? The quiet stone tables of the ancient embalmers. Softly, we do not need to constantly fight against Instead, we should simply pause to appreciate the incredible. The ancient priests carefully saved the human heart. Your own beating heart is actively the massive golden sarcophagus has been safely sealed. You can completely let go of the heavy the ancient winds sweeping softly across There are absolutely no more pressing corporate deadlines. Thank you for walking quietly beside me. I sincerely wish you a deeply peaceful